Hello guys and welcome back to the channel, and following on from our last episode, today we're going to cover and look at how you can install Python and set up Python for practicing your coding. This video will cover a number of key areas. So we're going to look at installing Python in your machine and exactly how to do that, and we're also going to look at installing an IDE. So an IDE is, if you can think of it as an application, an app that you need in order for you to safely code your Python scripts and your Python codes. So essentially it's an environment. And then finally we'll look at how you can run Python from the command shell as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Right guys, so what we're now going to do is install Python. But before we do that, I think it's a good idea to check whether or not you've already got Python on your machine. Now, believe it or not, Windows and Mac OS already download Python as part of their essential packages in the background. You just won't know it or see it. So what you want to do is go into your start menu here, and I'm going to search for CMD, which is short for command prompt. And if you're using a Mac, you want to look and search for terminal, which is the equivalent of the command prompt. So here we've got an instance of the command prompt booted up, and what I want to search for is just Python, and let's just see what this gives us. So here you can see it's confirmed that we've actually got Python 3.9.1 on our machine, which is a good sign. So that proves to me that I've already got Python and I'm good to go essentially. If you're not seeing that for whatever reason, then there is a way for you to download Python. So what you want to do is search for Python in Google, and you want to go to a website which is python.org. I might have already passed it. Here we go, python.org. And if you go to downloads, you'll be given a number of different options. So you can download Python for Mac, download Python for Linux, or just download Python for your Windows machine. So if you click on this button right here, it'll download the executable file, and then what you want to do is double click and run that and install Python using the wizard. And that should be it in terms of installing Python on your machine. And now we can look at how we can start to set up a virtual environment. Right guys, we're back to Google, and this time what I want to show you is how you can set up a environment for you to code and safely practice your Python coding. Now, an environment for coding in the world of IT is what is known as a integrated development environment. This is how you spell it, integrated development environment. And if you do a quick Google search, you'll see obviously a number of different results. And if you go on images, you'll see typically what one looks like. So you'll be familiar with things like this, these screens, these grayscale screens where the number of lines of code in them, and this is typical of a coder's environment really. So you may have very well seen many of these before. So what I want to show you is some popular IDEs, the first of which is an IDE called VS Code. VS Code is one of the more popular IDEs out there. It's an application. An application is owned by Microsoft, and it's actually a very common IDE which I've come across, especially at my place of work, at the bank that I work at. A lot of our developers and quants use Visual Studio Code. So to download Visual Studio Code, you want to go on the VS. Essentially, you want to search for VS Code in Google. And then under here, you'll see the download option. Again, it'll give you an executable file. Download this. Make sure you select the right version. And then what you want to do is download this and then run it. And as soon as you run it, you'll be given a number of options again using a pre-installation wizard. Assuming all is okay and all is fine, what you'll see is a screen like this when you load up VS Code for the first time. So essentially, this is your workspace. So what you've got right here is obviously your window for coding. You've got your terminal here at the bottom. This is the area where you'll see the output of your code. You've got the script name here, and then on the far left window you've got a few more Explorer features. So on the left here we've got an Explorer window. We can search for a particular file name. We can navigate to a file name, and in here we can actually search for one by a name. And then here we've got what looks like a source control or a connection for you to download Git. Git is actually a repository, a place where you can store your Python code. We've got a run and debug feature here. We're not going to cover that today. We've also got extensions. And then finally, you've got your a few more configurations. Now, one thing you will have to do with VS Code, and I'll just cover this quickly, is you'll have to install Python. So with VS Code, once you've downloaded it, make sure you click on Python and click, I believe it's enable. I've already got it on my machine, but you want to click on this button right here, whatever that appears here, or install, and that will make sure your Python is set up for VS Code. The reason why you have to do that is because VS Code is actually built for a number of coding languages, not just Python. And VS Code doesn't really know what language you're coding in unless you specify that. And then what you want to do is you want to create a new script. So if we go back to the Explorer window, I'm going to create a new script. Let's call it testing 2022 just for this example. And we're going to end it in .py, and that tells VS Code that it's a Python script. And then what we're going to do is run our first Python code. I'll just clean these up very quickly. So here we're going to type in our very first Python code, and this is probably the most common line of code you'll ever come across. It's print hello world, and make sure you write hello world in speech marks. This is a very common line of code. It's practically everywhere in any programming language. The reason why is because it's a very simple one. It's going to become a bit cliche. And essentially what we're doing here is we're asking Python to print a statement, and the statement itself is hello world. Now to run the code, it differs depending on each IDE, but for VS Code you want to go to, if you go to run and click run without debugging, if you do debugging, essentially it does what's equivalent of a spell check, but you want to run it without debugging, and the shortcut key for that is Control F5. So we're going to do that right now. Control F5. Give it a moment, and you can see right at the bottom, hello world. So congratulations, you've just run your first line of Python, and that's VS Code. The other IDE I want to cover with you today is Jupyter. Now Jupyter is an interesting one. Jupyter, spelled like this, is an application which is heavily used in academics. So you'll see a lot of students who are coming out of university who have done computer science or IT related or program related courses and degrees will have learned Jupyter. And Jupyter is very interesting in that it's not just like any other IDE. It's not like VS Code, for instance. It's actually quite modular in design. So I've lost the preview here. If we look at this screen here, this is what Jupyter looks like. Essentially, it runs in your browser, and we'll come onto that in a moment. And here you have different cells of code. And what it does is you can split out your code in different blocks, which are known as cells. And when you run Jupyter, you can choose to run individual cells, or you can choose to run the entire thing, and it'll run sequentially, one after another. The best thing about Jupyter is that if you're a particular line of code, say this one in cell 15 is not accurate, say you've got some spelling errors or syntax errors, the script will run, but it'll stop right up until 15, and it'll spit out an error code telling you what's wrong with it. And this is the beauty of Jupyter, in that you can actually debug it easier than, say, other IDEs. Although there are more powerful IDEs out there, Jupyter is very friendly for beginners. So with that said, let's go about installing Jupyter. And to install Jupyter, we're going to go back to Google here, and we're going to look for a package called Anaconda. And Anaconda actually contains Jupyter and what's known as Jupyter Notebook. So we'll click here, and you want to download products. Well, you'll start off here, download, click download for Windows, or look at the other option for downloading for Mac, for instance. I'll download right here. And this is downloading as we speak. And before we open the installer, we need to run Anaconda first, run the package, it'll provide us with the configuration for Jupyter, and then we'll run and open a browser where we can begin coding in Jupyter Notebook. Right guys, so we've downloaded Anaconda. We're gonna run this one, and then we're gonna install this and set this up. So while that's setting up, we're going to configure and look at some of the options that you're given. Click next to this, accept the terms and license agreement. You don't have to scroll all the way down. And then I'm only going to install this for myself, or you can select all users if you share your laptop or your PC with other users. Set this up in a folder, destination folder, and then add install. Now here you got a few options, so you can essentially allow Anaconda to become your default if you like. I'm not going to choose it, but you can set Anaconda 3 as your default for any Python packages or Python scripts. We're going to run install, give it a quick moment here, and we'll have a quick look at what options we're given. You might notice that it's taken a while to install. That's because Anaconda is actually installing a number of packages. Here you can see it's spinning through a number of packages, and these are Python libraries and libraries for other programming languages such as R as well. So once this is done, we'll take a quick look at the user interface and the menu options. Right, and we've completed, so let's take a look. I'm just going to click next to this and next to this. And we don't need the tutorial. We don't actually need the getting started wizard either. So we're going to click finish. And that's that. That should be done. And then what you want to do is search for Anaconda Navigator. Run this. And Anaconda is now ready. And this is the default user menu that you're given as soon as you load up Anaconda. And it's quite interesting. You'll see a number of obviously familiar names here. So for instance, you got VS Code here. I mentioned PyCharm before, so you can actually, from Anaconda, you can actually run additional IDEs like VS Code and PyCharm. We'll come back to this, but really what we want is Jupyter Notebook. So what we're going to do is click on Launch, and that will begin to install to configure and install an instance. Windows will give you an option. How do you want to open this file? You can't see it on my screen right now, but you want to open it in your browser of choice. My browser of choice is Google Chrome. Give it a moment, and then voila, we're now actually in Jupyter. So what you want to do is, set up, if you like, your destination. So this is my destination. I've got a folder here called Jupyter, and we're going to create a new Python free file. Remaining within your browser, your web browser, as I mentioned before, Jupyter is now ready for you to begin coding. So we'll go back to the example that I used earlier. We're going to run a print statement. We're going to run print speech marks hello world. And to run in Jupyter, slightly different. You've got a few options. You can run a specific cell, which is just Control Enter. You can run a cell and then select below, or run a cell and insert a new cell below, or you can just run all. So we're just going to run all or Control Enter, either, up to you. I'm just going to run all, and when you see the asterisk, that means it's processing, and you'll see your result, hello world. And that's it, Jupyter Notebook. And I'll show you an example of how you can insert a new cell. So I'm going to click cell, and I want to go to insert a cell below. I'm going to create two variables, and we'll come on to what these mean later. A is going to be 5, and B within the same cell is going to be 3. And then I'm going to insert one more cell below, and now I'm going to print essentially a calculation. I'm going to do A, make sure we got this right, A multiplied by B, and the answer we're expecting is 15. So 5 times 3 is 15. We're going to run everything, so run all. Here you can see in cell 2 it ran hello world, which outputted, and in cell 3 I ran two variables, and in cell 4 we got the result that we expected. And that's Jupyter Notebook. And I will refer back to Jupyter in upcoming tutorials. Jupyter is actually a very clean and easy application to use for coding in Python. A recommendation for anyone who wants to start learning in Python, definitely check out Jupyter. And guys, there's one more feature I want to show you before we move on to our final IDE, and that's to show you how you can actually run Python within the command prompt. So what we're going to do is go back to the command prompt. So if you remember, we go to start, CMD, that brings us up the command prompt. And essentially, we're going to run a Python script. We're going to run the hello world script, but we're going to execute it to run from the command prompt. And that is the beauty of Python as a programming language. It can be executed and run in any environment, and Windows and Mac systems and even cloud systems are designed to work seamlessly and run Python seamlessly. And that's the universal appeal that Python has. Now, to do this, we need to create a program. So we're going to create hello world, save it as a program in a text file, and then save that text file in a folder that we can remember. So I'm going to go into this folder here. This is a skills with SID folder, which is placed under my documents. And I'm going to click new. Actually, what we're going to do is go straight into Notepad, open a new Notepad, and I'm going to type in print hello world as we have been doing before, and then close a bracket. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do save as. Okay, so in Notepad you do a save as. You don't want to save it as a text document, you want to save it as all files and call it hello.py, and then you want to click save. Make sure that's saved. We're going to exit out of that. Obviously it hasn't appeared. If I go back into my folder here, I can see it's appeared. The reason why you see an S is because I've got this set to open by default all Python scripts open in one of my other IDEs called Sublime Text. I'll show you that after this. But we've now got our text file, which is hello.py. We're going to go into command prompt, and what I want you to do, is take this path. So take the file path of the folder, Control C. So you're just going to copy that, and what you need to do in command prompt is set the working directory for it. So I want you to type in cd space and then paste the file path that I just asked you to copy, and hit enter. And it may look like it's done nothing, but actually what you've done is you've set the working directory to that file path. And now all we need to do is ask command prompt or ask Windows to run the Python script. To do that, we click Python, and then we enter the name of the script, hello.py, and then we run that, and there we go. We've actually run the program hello world using command prompt. So that's just another way, and in many ways a sophisticated way, because a lot of programmers who I work with, some of whom don't actually use an IDE, they use command prompt entirely. And it may come to a point in your life where you're really good and you're really able to code in Python, and you may find it a lot easier just to execute and run Python scripts straight from command prompt or command shell. Right guys, and the last application I want to show you is an application that I use personally right now, which is called Sublime Text. Sublime Text is a very clean, very simple looking IDE visually. It's got all the tools, essentials that you need in terms of debugging and highlighting text if you like, and it also has a very clean user interface. So all you see is a left-hand navigation pane, which is which essentially is your your destination, and on your right-hand side you'll have your scripting window, and then you'll also have your output window as well. So we'll take a quick look. I've actually got Sublime Text already installed on my laptop. I'm not going to show you how to download and install it. It's quite simple. It's similar to a few others that we looked at. It's similar to VS Code. The good thing about Sublime Text is that you don't actually need to install Python. It's actually already pre-configured. So I've got a window open here. I've got Sublime Text open. We've got an untitled file. We need to essentially save the file before we even script or code in anything right here. Want to go to File, go to Save As, and you find a destination where you want to install this. I want to put this into Sublime Text. So I have a folder called Sublime Text, and in here I'm going to run a test script. I'm going to save it, give it a useful name, and you want to save the file type as, and here you'll see a number of programming languages, essentially extensions to a number of programming languages. We want Python. Just leave it as Python, or you could do .py, but I've left it as Python. Save as type. Click Save. What that does essentially tells Sublime Text that we're going to be coding in Python, so we want to highlight and configure this as we go along in a Python standard. Now that we've saved our Python script and given it a name, we can now run a simple script. We're going to code the classic print hello world. So you want speech marks, make sure your text is in speech marks. And although we've told Sublime Text that we're coding in Python, it hasn't actually highlighted any syntax of ours. So what do we mean by syntax? So typically in an IDE, you'll see words like print are colored in a certain way or italicized in a certain way because the IDE knows what you're trying to do. And the reason why we can't see anything, everything looks plain, is because on the bottom right here it says plain text. So if you left click on it and then select Python, you now will see the highlight of all of our syntax. So here you can see print is italicized, and this text statement is also given a specific color as well. And to run a line of code or to run your script in Sublime Text, the shortcut key is Control B. And there you go. Here's your result, hello world, and actually finished in 121 milliseconds, so you know it's really fast. The other thing I love about Sublime Text is how you can actually configure and play around with your user interface. So for instance, if you hold Control and scroll up or down, you can actually control the size of your text. So if you're doing a lot of text, you might want to zoom out a bit so you can see the full page. And you can also change and play around with the colors and themes. Obviously, this is a dark theme. If you go to preferences, you can actually select a theme, a color theme, and you can choose a lighter theme should you wish, or choose a theme which is a different color altogether. Let's go with Monarchy here, for instance, and we'll see what that does. And you can see it's given more of a gray finish and highlighted our text in yellow. So that's Sublime Text, and a very, very good beginner's IDE for anyone who wants to get started with coding. And that pretty much wraps this video up, guys. So there's one more mention of an IDE called Atom. Atom is another very clean, friendly, easy to use IDE. It's owned by the makers of GitHub, and it's similar to Sublime Text and VS Code in that it's got a very simple, minimalistic visual look and feel. So do check that one out. And for our next video, we're going to look at a few more. We're going to move on from this, and we're going to look at a few more topics. We're going to look at packages in Python and what it means to run and use and install a package in Python. Python essentially becomes really powerful when you start to import packages, and you've got a number of different packages that exist out there. And then we're going to look at pip and using pip to manage those packages in question. So that's in the next video. Stay tuned and stay safe, stay healthy. God bless.